Now, the biggest news in the book, in a book that the New York Times says has no news in it, is George Clooney's account. It doesn't say it's from Clooney, but anyone who knows how the world works knows it's from Clooney. Clooney said backstage at the famous fundraiser that that Joe Biden didn't recognize him. And that it was horrifying to Clooney that how could someone he'd known for many, many years not recognize him? Last night on Two-Way Tonight, Rufus Gifford, who was one of the top two fundraisers along with Jeffrey Katzenberg, was on Two-Way Tonight. And he was, we actually said, were you at that event? He was. And listen to what Rufus said. He saw. Rufus, were you at the famous George Clooney fundraiser?
I was, and
So,
I was one of the 8 people in the room when this
yeah,
infamous moment
yeah.
happened.
Oh yeah,
Do you think
Rufus was in
it's
the room.
do you think it's true that he didn't recognize George Clooney?
No, is the answer to the question. And I mean, and not only that, it's like an absurd thing.
Right.
And
So
what
yeah,
happens here is this: like George and
exactly.
Julia were standing in front, I was literally right there. George
Julia
and Julia
Roberts.
standing right in front of the curtains that get ready to just like take photos that they always do because as the presidents walk in, and then the advance guy comes in and says to President Biden and President Obama, President Biden, see George Clooney and Julia Roberts, and it was. I will say this: when I read this in the book, I was like, this did never happen. Now, I will tell you this: I am not defending the president's performance in that event. He was out of it.
Okay. So Rufus also said he was interviewed for the book. And the book, as best I can see, does not contain an alternative account. It contains what is obviously Clooney's account. So that's one issue. But the other issue is here's a guy who was right there and says he saw it completely differently. So, Dan, what do you make of Clooney v. Rufus? And keep in mind, they're both sharp dressed, handsome men. So don't let that factor into your adjudication.
And Rufus is a very good friend, and he was there. I will always give Rufus the benefit of the doubt, but what I will say is somebody is not telling the truth. There were multiple people in the room, as he said. I have not heard President Obama or anybody else come out and say, which they could very easily do, that is simply not true. Instead,
Well,
even
Rufus did though.
Rufus did, but I'm saying in terms of Rufus says one thing, Clooney, let's say, says the other. What say the other people in the room?
Right.
And in that regard, I think their silence, and this goes back to immediately after that event, there were murmurs that Barack Obama was somewhat horrified about what he saw, and Rufus says
Yeah.
he was out of it, but
Yeah.
no one's cleaning it up other
Yeah.
than
I'm not. You said lie. I'll just say it's not.
I didn't.
They might.
Yeah,
Well, you did. You
yeah, I
said
did.
somebody's lying, but it could be
Yep.
they just had different impressions of the moment. Sean, you're a student of the media
Yeah.
and of backstage fundraiser of moments. What do you
So
make of this?
two quick things. Number one, there's a great exchange on the word lie from Dan Crenshaw in the Energy and Commerce Committee that I think is just made me laugh when Dan said that. That's worth Googling. Number two, Ben Smith needs to work on figuring out how to get a better shot. So Ben, I know you watch. Let's work on your shot.
All right, well, it was his two-way debut. We were happy to have
I
him
know,
on.
but even
Ben
for
Smith
a
of
guy who was a
Semaphore.
media critic, he should be a little bit more attentive to his settings. So Ben's
Okay.
a smart
We'll take
student.
that. We'll take that note.
Thank you.
There's a room raider on the side.
So let's get to the issue. I am coming down on the side of Rufus on this, and why? It's if you listen to how Rufus explains the scenario, he's absolutely right. Republican, Democrat, because he goes on in that clip to talk about standard protocol. And he's absolutely right. Whether or not it's Donald Trump, Barack Obama, or Bill Clinton, I get when you go to the receiving line at like the Christmas party, right? They'll be like, Mr. President, Sean Spicer and his wife, that is protocol. And the way Rufus describes how that event unfolded is exactly precise in terms of how the introductions to a president at an event, whether it's a fundraiser, a Christmas party, whatever, happen. And so I believe his account because that's literally protocol how it would happen.
Well,
And
the
just to be
only
clear,
thing,
and Rufus is on the record, and Clooney is hiding behind anonymity.
I mean, the only thing I will say, having done a million of those and being the staffer who stands there and you look and say, Sean, Mr. President, you remember Sean and Mrs. Spicer, is you can absolutely tell when somebody recognizes and remembers the name, because you start chit-chatting and they'll, and when they can't, John Kerry was so bad with names, and you would constantly try to put it back into the conversation into 30 seconds. That I could see an instance where everything Rufus says is right, and to some extent George Clooney is right.
But Dan, the difference is it's not the recognition isn't facial. It's not like, oh, I didn't. When you say Mr. President, George Clooney and Julia Roberts, it's not like he goes, now who is Clooney? Where do I know that from? Clooney.
You know what Mr. Smithers would say? Clooney, eh? Doesn't ring a bell. You would say. One more thing about this topic, and then we're going to your questions. We're not going to talk about the planes today. Sean, does CNN's media critic, or whatever he is, Brian Stelter, ever disappoint? He's always right there whenever we need him, right? So we're talking about this issue of how they dealt with Rufus's account. The Brian Stelter, CNN's media critic newsletter, just came out, and his lead item about the book. He's also on the side of publicist for his friend Jake's book. He says the book admirably the authors hired the New Yorker's famed fact-checking department head, Fergus McIntosh, to ensure everything in the book was fully buttoned up. So I'd be curious what Mr. McIntosh would say about Rufus's account, which is not included in the book as an alternative interpretation of what occurred.
Well, and one of the things that we're not talking about is, again, it's not just Rufus versus Clooney, right? I mean, Jake Tapper is complicit in this now. He is complicit in trying to create a narrative that clearly there are opposing views to. And for a guy who's so sanctimonious about misinformation and whatever, it just continues to blow my mind how this gets overlooked. The guy is literally going to profit from spreading misinformation and for being complicit in the cover-up of Joe Biden.
Those of you who enjoy this topic, please join me on Next Up later today on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. That was a delicious video experience. I think you'll agree. Now, what you need to do in return for getting to enjoy that is hit the subscribe button, be part of the two-way community, never miss a thing.